Thank you, everyone. Oh, we're being recorded now. So thank you very much, Justin, for having me and for inviting me to speak with you today, and for everyone at NYU Florence that is a part of making these Black History Month events possible.
Yeah. And so, I wanted to sort of start us off on, the way in which I thought about framing this conversation was through a few different directions that sort of overlap and intersect. But I thought I would start with something that maybe our audience may be more familiar with. I think that the exhibition, Soul of a Nation, Art in the Age of Black Power, is one that was widely visited, and I'm hoping that most people are familiar with. Hopefully, a lot of you got the opportunity to see it firsthand. I did, and I was very fortunate to get to walk through this exhibition and really think about it on a very, through an extended period of time, which is always my favorite way to see any exhibition. So this exhibition, besides being sort of a traveling exhibition, so showing up in multiple venues and the challenges of thinking about what that means, encompassing the years 1963 to 1983, so 20 years of history. Also really pointing to, I think through the subtitle, the overlapping of art and politics, and really reflecting upon the role of artists in social justice and in these struggles. With more than 60 artists, I'm thinking also of all the decisions that had to be made. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about was, I think a lot of times when we create exhibitions that are more survey exhibitions that chart a certain longer span of time, there's a way in which we're intervening in or thinking through the lens also of what it means to canonize artists, and to canonize exhibitions, to provide the textbook on certain conversations, right? And so having been involved directly in that experience, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what it means to sort of being involved in an exhibition like that, and the layers that are embedded in it in regards to the ways in which it's meant to be remembered.
I think that's a really important question, because I don't think you can go into anything lightly, and I think that there was very much, I guess from the start, I was very much aware of a weight of expectation. The thing I often say about Soul of a Nation, and it's like, it's me and Mark's baby, but that we made 67 promises and we kept each of those promises. So I think that artists and their families and their estates being willing to entrust you with their work and with a story is something that we took so seriously from the start. And I think precisely being aware of art histories in the plural, and starting from a place that was acutely aware of the history of Tate's own collection, and how certain artworks in the collection, by say Frank Bowling or Sam Gilliam, for instance, were actually evidence to this bigger lack, and what that meant to begin to address that lack in a specific institutional context. And there are a number of things that I think was important about our being aware of simultaneously. And one of those was that we weren't the first to be doing this or writing the book on anything. So first of all, it was having done the research and being respectful about the artists who wrote the history, but also the exhibitions that came before. So we were at pains to always acknowledge that this was a story, not the story, and how really is not too strong a word to say indebted. Like there was this debt to people like Dr. David Driscoll or Kelly Jones, in a subsequent generation, and many, many others in between, Dr. Samela Lewis, that thinking about how these histories are written, and Mark and another colleague of ours, Ali Biswas, have a Soul of a Nation reader that's just about to come out. And I was very happy to write a little bit for the afterword for that, but that contains primary sources written by many of the artists. So, you can go back to read what Benny Andrews was saying with the Black Emergency Coalition at the time. And I think that being aware of that, of understanding the whole history, but not trying to think that you can carry it all, or certainly not own it all, that there's a way to both acknowledge those who have come before and to do that with sincerity and respect, but then also to say that there are other stories that can be told. So even in the Soul of a Nation catalog, that's how we end the introduction, saying that, you know, what we hope is to see solo exhibitions about any number of artists that were included, but equally that there can be other kind of jewel-like presentations of work that focuses solely on Afrocobra, or that really looks in depth at the genius of Linda Good Bryant and Just Above Midtown Gallery. So I think that way of acknowledging that you're part of something, but you're not the whole of something, is actually a way to address the canon in a manner that, you know, isn't crazy making. You know, I feel like the three most important words in the exhibition we gave in the first room when we're talking about Spiral, and some of the questions that were first posed by a group of artists, a number of whom attended the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom together. And then after this moment, they're saying, you know, is your first responsibility as a Negro artist to yourself or to your community? You know, should we be making work that looks like the world around us, or can we be working in a more experimental, abstract vein? And the most important answer that we came up with is they gave no single answer. And I think there's something about freeing people up to say, you know, you're not going to understand everything about this subject matter, or about a time period, or about even one person's motivations from any one exhibition or one book. But if it can actually make that complexity and that richness kind of interesting and true, and that's where I come back to, you know, those promises that we wanted to keep, in terms of trying to faithfully honor what people cared about. That's the only way that it felt manageable to try and take on this notion of the canon, or even redressing a canon, knowing that inevitably what you're hoping to redress in terms of past omissions, or, you know, individuals who've been overlooked, will inevitably lead to others who've been overlooked, or who were also part of conversations but won't be contained within 12 galleries or 200 pages.
Yeah, no, thank you for that response, and I really like the idea of sort of the sort of I guess that the idea of sort of having to and feeling that you're acknowledging what's come before you, but at the same time recognizing the possibility that is in front of you in terms of what can be charted and what still needs to be uncovered. I'm wondering if also, like in the context of, you know, I said survey before, and I'm thinking about also like the survey course, right? In the same way in which we need to sort of acknowledge certain things, but at the same time chart possibility, right? In a certain sense. But I think that, you know, the challenges that are involved in that kind of exhibition and in keeping those promises that you're talking about are also, you know, really sort of incredible in terms of the span that they have. And then also thinking more about also the opportunities that we have to engage in an exhibition of this scale, of this magnitude, right? That has this sort of breadth. So really taking advantage of the moment in that way. And I wanted to sort of think a little bit, because I think, you know, in recognizing possibility, it's also sort of thinking about I like to think about the language of sort of like dreaming through practice, and sort of, you know, a lot of times dreaming beyond our means when it comes to sort of creation.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of times, you know, in my own arts education, I was not actually really taught to dream beyond my means very often. And it was just something that I sort of had to find on my own, because I think there's so much more of a like practical reflection that comes with thinking about studio, thinking about resources, thinking about all these things that are truly important, but that don't actually guide the art. But I'm wondering if, I'm thinking about the Chisenhale Gallery and its dedication to artists' ambitions, and what it means to really think about the language of what fostering an artist's ambition, really providing access or platforms or strategies or support in really pushing towards ambition, pushing towards sort of dreaming beyond one's means. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the role of the gallery in fostering and supporting ambition itself, and what that looks like and what that means.
Yeah, well, Justin, just as you were saying to the participants on the call that are in easy access of Florence, that they should come and see the exhibitions that we've put together, and absolutely that should happen. For those of you who are able to come to London when we're safely able to reopen, then I really urge you to come to Chisenhale Gallery if you haven't, or even if you have, we'd love to see you again. I think it's a very special place for individuals who don't know. It was part of a movement in the 1980s where a number of artists were evicted from their central London warehouses like Butler's Wharf, and then ended up relocating to the East End because property prices were cheap. It wasn't the sought after enclave that many people might think of East London as today. Well, that was made that way because of artists' hard graft and what they could see. And so that it's that spirit of possibility and ingenuity where a group of artists, Mona Hatoum included, were able to identify in a disused veneer factory, and it was a brewery at one point, the possibility to have artist studios and really a world-class gallery. And so still under one roof today, we're 3 organizations, Chisenhale Gallery, and then we have wonderful neighbors at Chisenhale Studios and also Chisenhale Dance Space. And I think there's something about that combination of not separating the making and the thinking time that's required to present a body of work. It's not like a shiny finished thing without the messiness of making mistakes and thinking through possibilities. And so I'm really I'm kind of moved to be now leading a gallery that I've admired so much for so long. And it is because that sense of imbuing the belief one has in an artist and then putting that, that it's something that's active, it's something that you show through the critical process of talking about the work, of saying, well, I love this work that you've done, but what might you do? You don't have to make more of the same just because you have this space, with time and with thinking what might result. And I think that results in something that's almost kind of alchemical. It's kind of magical that the gallery is able to reinvent itself because it is really not trying to force artists to be in its image, but really saying, actually, I'm intrigued, or I don't understand what's happening here. I'd love to invite you into this space and to make of it what you need it, and we'll support you in that way. And I think that there are other spaces that do that, but I think our being true to the gallery's mission and why it was founded is something that has created a really strong artist community, and it just kind of grows and grows, so that artists who then show there are equally supportive of the next generation of artists who show there. And I think that those conversations are also incredibly fruitful. And I think that way of working and that way of being, where the process is as important as what results. And the fact that work may well then be in major museum collections or in biennials or in other exhibitions, that becomes part of the process and the thinking time. But equally, there's that that relationship with the artist that endures. And so it's not actually that dissimilar to the process that was undertaken with something like Soul of a Nation, that whereas I always think of it as with art history, what you have is a kind of critical distance that comes from spending time in the stacks and in archives and kind of piecing something together. And the privilege of and challenge of working with living artists is a critical proximity. You know, you're right there with the person, you know, like what they want or don't want on a sandwich or, you know, those sorts of things. You know, I very flippantly say that that's one of the things that Soul of a Nation gave me that I love is I've had, you know, Panera soup and salad with so many of my heroes, and you know, I know their orders, and that's a special thing to me. You know, that's not something everybody has, but I think that sense of understanding both the profound humanity and vulnerability of an artist. You know, they're not superheroes, they are people, but like the extraordinary depths and the way that they allow us to see things anew. It's an incredibly rewarding work to be able to do, or a process to be a part of. And I think that it's that Chisenhale shows time and again is an investment in people and in that process.
Yeah, no, I really love the idea of this sort of the generation of a community through the sort of fostering of work with one artist and moving into the next. And I think that in a certain sense, it's also about the profound sort of faith that you have to have in artists to create and foster that sense of ambition, right? So that the faith that you have to have in undertaking new work is always, you know, it's the challenge of also the artist not knowing exactly what is coming, and so you're all sort of in it together and walking towards what is to come, you know.
Right, I think it's exactly that. I think there's this sense that for so many of us, and I understand why, you know, you're only interested in risk in as much as, you know, the payoff is a sure thing, you know, like, oh, it's definitely going to be great. But there's something about working and getting to that point and really being, like I said, I guess invested in the whole process and what that might mean, and really thinking through what might be unexpected and how to manage that, and how to also like stand with and support someone, I think is important.
Yeah, I like that you bring up risk. I like to think a lot about the ways in which we use a language of like risk assessment, right? And the ways in which when we think about risk assessment in the context of art making and exhibition creating, like what are those factors, what are those parameters, you know, and what are we willing to sort of walk into, because I think that ultimately the role of faith, the role of trust with the artists and between the artist and institution is really crucial to any sort of starting point. And then I think also just the sense that, you know, what is to come is going to come, is this other aspect, right?
It's crucial to artists too. I think that there's something about our move toward theory, and wanting to talk about our work as curators or maybe as art historians in a manner that, you know, is rigorous, or that, you know, hopes to get away from something that seems too subjective. But it can also sap, you know, some of those really esoteric things that are actually a part of the process, you know, that we've been talking about, like trust or faith. And maybe that's some of what I was trying to think more about in relation to a group show, you know, that only existed online, like Possessions for Freeze, because I think that sense of faith is something that's so important to artists. And I don't always mean literally in the term of religious faith, though it can be. But I was so inspired by what Noah Davis, Khalil Joseph's brother, had said in relation to what moved him to paint, you know, and this sense that the second you brought up anything spiritual, it was such like an immediate turnoff to anyone in the contemporary art world. Like, no, we're not engaging with that. I don't want to deal with it. But there is something, that maybe used to be referred to as the transcendental, or, just referring to something as beautiful, or, being inspired, these things that you can't quite get a purchase on, but they're there and they move us. And I think that, I don't know, some of that woolliness or messiness, or yeah, maybe it is scary or risky, but I think it's important to honor that too, or to be aware that it's there and that it's part of the creative process.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I think, just shifting a little bit into thinking about sort of for you as a curator, sort of the opportunity that is there to sort of dream and to sort of reach as well through each project that you're engaging in. I wanted to shift to thinking a little bit about the context of the Venice Biennial, which I think for most artists and curators is sort of a dream in general, to sort of be able to work within that context. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, with the opportunity to curate the British Pavilion, what went into the process of study and reflection, what influenced your choices in that realm? Because I think that the what we were just saying in regards to risk assessment, right? There's always this sort of additional layer based on sort of what the context in which we're working is, right? And the ways in which that context can kind of shape what we're doing.
Yeah, I think Venice is so particular, and every country handles Venice so differently that, it was also a very particular and, thrilling, but very particular mandate to curate the British Pavilion, because the curator and the artist are kind of brought together. So there are, in order to be as representative as possible, there's a selection committee that selected me, and there was a selection committee that I observed but did not vote in, that selects the artist. So again, I think there is very much a sense of wanting to actually find ways to open up a process to many different voices, so that it's not, oh, this chosen curator gets to pick so and so, or whatever it might be. And yeah, I think it was a particularly fascinating process, because I think each time you're having to find different ways to provide what an artist needs from you, or what they need in order to make their work and to present it, because a curator can't curate something without an artist's work. An artist can make artwork without a curator. And I think I just learned so much from listening to Kathy, and we shared a lot of we actually shared a lot of poetry, and she'd send me books in the mail, and I think that became a way of understanding a kind of intensely personal process that making is for her, and to be able to kind of quietly watch that process as it evolved, particularly because our pavilion has a basement. And so Kathy was able to convert that space into her studio effectively for a number of months. And I think that to me was just a really, a very, very profound learning experience. Because, just as you were saying at the beginning about like an informal conversation, talking to artists is my favorite thing to do. Like, I just love doing that. So there was this sense of learning from an artist, in all kinds of ways that each project brings about. And I think with Kathy in particular, as an artist who I think for reasons I completely respect, is very, very resistant to interpretation of the work, of then presenting it, the work means this, or this is what you're looking at. The reason why this is here is because it refers to, that then shuts down any other kind of possibility or any other way of seeing it. And we had a lot of interesting conversations about that double bind of, if you don't give people something to latch on to, then does it become, illegible or inscrutable. And then even if that's not why you're presenting it in that way, might be misread as, oh, am I already supposed to be in the know? Like, where is the something that can help me access this information? But then the kind of the flip side of that being, well, normally it's the people in the know already who then read an essay that's written by, an expert or something like that. And so thinking about this way to free up the process and access to the work so that there's not a whole lot of stuff in the way. And so it was, a really interesting and challenging process in that way to remain true to what the artist needed and wanted from the experience. And that process ended up being about taking away and taking away and taking away, taking away the lights, taking away the skirting boards, like removing all these kind of pretenses so that certain things could be heightened in the experience, like, Venetian light that's like light nowhere else. And, just being there with the work. And yeah, I think there were lots of funny moments where, because of climate change, there was, some pretty cataclysmic flooding in Venice and quite a lot of storms and just like very unusual weather patterns. And then at one point, we were trying to clean the floor while people were still in there. And then people got their cameras out and started filming, and they think it's some kind of performance. So, it's one of those funny things where like anything you do or don't do can be, read or misinterpreted as, somehow being part of the work. And I think that what was most instructive about that experience was about how doing the least is what served the work the best.
Yeah, no, I really like the idea of sort of the process of sort of getting things out of the way of the work, and sort of the care that goes into that, which I think a lot of times we may not recognize. And I think also within the context of the Venice Biennial, where the audience is so incredibly broad, and it mixes in sort of general tourism of Venice with sort of like art Mecca type movements as well. And I think that, the challenges of sort of thinking about the role of what we provide, what points of access there are for the work in that context are particularly complex because of that sort of broader range, right? So I really appreciate all those challenges, and I really like the idea. It's almost like housekeeping, right? Of keeping things out of the way so that things can be appreciated as they are.
And it's funny what happens when you do that, because one of the works in one of the main works in the first room, because it had these small objects that, people very readily interpreted as offerings, a coin or the kind of exoskeleton of an insect or a dried leaf. People started adding things to it. So by the end, our student fellows who invigilated the space and were there to speak with people and answer questions, and there were many questions, ended up with this box, completely full of these little offerings. And so some of it in that way of thinking about what can be done that serves the work and also serves the audience was also, Kathy made available a number of sculptures that were made out of the same material as some of the works on view, so that people who were, say, blind or had other kind of access requirements would then be able to handle objects or to interact with the works in this different way. And I think that there were things like that were much more about a sensory experience, and using our senses and trusting those senses became something that was important.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. I'm wondering, because we're talking a little bit about the context of Venice and the ways in which it sort of shaped, the conversation in regards to the light, and I'm sure also in regards to sort of the different things that come with that exhibition. and with that space, that project. In reading about and thinking about you curating within the context of the V&A, I'm curious, like, about the role of context in sort of shaping your sort of formation as a curator, and the sort of sensibilities and maybe valuable lessons that came out of that particular environment, and sort of
Oh, honey.
that you carry with you. I can only imagine.
Um, well, I really loved my time at the V&A. I think I started curating right on the cusp of when curating courses started to become um, more abundant, more available in various university curricula. And so I'm probably part of the last generation of people who learned how to do my job on the job, so I was very much like an apprentice, like the first part of my time as an assistant curator. Just again, like just observing, like just watching, like, oh, this is how you do it. This is how you handle something. We used to have these workshops about things like that. If you don't work in a museum, you wouldn't know that, once a jug reaches the end of its working life and is in a museum collection, you don't pick it up by the handle. I wasn't in the ceramics collection, but it's things like that, like things you might just go to do. So I was in works on paper-based collection, so handle paper in a different way. But there were those kinds of very specific things, like how to write on paper, like if you're numbering an object. There are actually some Black Panther posters that we borrowed for Soul of a Nation from the V&A that I can recognize my handwriting on, my E numbers on the back. So yeah, there were lots of very, very pedantic things like that were wonderful. But I also think that so many of the, mistakes or things that I learned there on curating projects had to do with, again, not necessarily being aware of how many different directions you have to face as a curator. And but by which I mean, like, being acutely aware of who your audience is, who you're talking to, and what you're sharing with them. Also being aware of your own knowledge. And I mean that in both ways, both like the limits of your knowledge, but equally, it took me some time to also be aware of, like, the possibility that, like you, Justin, things that I don't know. And so you can't take that for granted. And I think I also, maybe at that point, certainly wasn't recognizing that I knew things that other people didn't know. And I don't mean that in a big-headed way. I mean it in a way that, like, you have to meet people where they are, or let them know what you know. And so, and I'm saying all of this because on one project in particular, I was so interested or so consumed with wanting to address an institutional history of institutional racism, and really the history of collections building in British context, and the ways in which the cultural production of a whole continent, Africa, was really in so many ways consigned to ethnographic and anthropological collections, and not at a particular point in history given the same value in terms of creative innovation, or and so I was very, very consumed with the fact that within the institution's own history, there was very much a story, even within what at the time was really the kind of the official biography of the institution, Vision and Accident, V&A. It was written in the book that the museum did not collect art or artifacts or decorative art from Africa, that was the purview of the Natural History Museum, of the British Museum, of other collections, even though there were many, many objects in the collection to the contrary. But then there would always be some reason why. Well, this is here specifically because it was, you know, used as an example in a materials and techniques gallery or something. There's always a reason why, but then equally this reason why not. But if you don't bring people into that story, you don't know what people's expectations are. And so if you think like, oh, wow, this is a moment when I can go to a museum that I've never been to before and see a whole history unfold in the way that the V&A does spectacular exhibitions like Art Deco. This is going to be great. I can't wait. And then if someone's doing, you know, quite polemical contemporary art interventions in various galleries, like, wait a second, I've got to walk all over the museum. I don't know what's where. Like, I didn't come to see this abstract sculpture. What is going on here? And, you know, there wasn't enough. I think it is the time that made me really realize that if you're making an exhibition, then you're making it for someone. And if you're working with living artists, you're also making it with someone. And so trying to be, really mindful of the needs of both, or being clear who you're speaking to. And that doesn't mean that other people won't find it or won't be aware, but I think that kind of clarity around assumptions, like, oh, everybody knows the history of the V&A. No, they don't. You know, why would you even think that? And, you know, why would you imagine that? And so I think that's where I really learned what it meant to listen to artists, but also that even if you want to, work with other amazing like-minded people, because I also wasn't working in a vacuum at the V&A. I was taught by really inspiring curators like Rosemary Miles. There was a wider, very well-funded project that had already been initiated by people like Ethne Nightingale and Mary Guyett, where the Arts and Humanities Research Council and the Heritage Lottery Fund had funded this work to look at Africa within the collection. So, you know, it's not like I got there and figured all this out. And there's that part of it as well, that you're kind of contributing to something bigger than you. And that's what I love about working in museums. That's what I love about, you know, leading a really amazing team at Chisenhale now. But I think that within all of those things, it is important to keep questioning, like, who are we doing this for? Like, who is our main community? Not that we want to leave anyone out, but, you know, if I'm so busy kind of thinking I'm speaking truth to power and like shaking my fist, but my back's to you and you're like, wait, I'm trying to talk to you, then I'm not doing my job. So I think by the time, you know, where we started with a project like Soul of a Nation, I think there was so much intentional work around how this might be an exhibition that could really connect with young Londoners, like being aware of being in a city where, 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 young people have one non-white parent. You know, how many people speak a language in addition to English in their homes? Like, what a special city that makes us, you know, that 40% of us identify as persons of color, you know, that I think that those types of things then provided a very clear mode of address to say, you know, you may be thinking, what do these American artists have to do with me? Or why am I interested in seeing a work that was made in 1967? But there are these other ways of forging these connections. You know, it's one of the reasons why I was so excited about, you know, working with Khalil Joseph or Zoe Ashton or Cecilia Meke, so that there could be also those intergenerational bridges. So even if one young person is interested in one artist because someone like Khalil or Cecile is interested in that work, then that creates a moment and a bridge. So I think that it was all of those types of things, of connecting those dots between artist, object, and audience, I think really came together, you know, during my time at the V&A.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing us through that as well. It's sort of nice to think about that journey and all the things that get picked up along the way. Um,
And
I
mistakes made. I think, yeah, a lot of times, you know, all these that, yeah, nobody does everything right all the time. And I mean, you can still care and get something sincerely wrong, and
of
then,
course.
if someone gives you the opportunity to do it again, hopefully you've learned from that. But for me, that's definitely part of it. Fortunately, yeah, I've never damaged an artwork in a collection, but I've definitely, you know, would go back and do things differently in relation to how I've presented some projects or presented the context around projects, so that you're just being as sure as possible that what you're doing, it doesn't mean that people will like it, but it helps if you're saying like, oh, well, I understand what you're trying to do, but I'm not with it. It's different from like, I don't understand what's going on here. That's something that you can avoid, or that you can do your best work against. So
Of course. Yeah. And I think that, when you talk a little bit about audience and then also the idea of like sort of forms of co-production or working with artists on the creation of things, it makes me think also about some of, in thinking about the decision making that guides your process in the work. One of the things that comes to mind is the idea of urgency. And, I'm wondering, maybe as sort of a closing question, we can open up to the audience, of course, for questions. But I'm always sort of curious about like what role urgency plays in the decision making around what happens when, right? So, because I think that we have these sort of overarching long-term visions and projects that are always sort of there, and then there's all these other things that are interjected as these sort of urgencies that really need to be addressed, that really need to be looked at. And I'm wondering what role urgency plays in your decision making, and maybe if there's something in this moment that you feel is particularly urgent in your work or a project that you have gone to because of that, right?
yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I stay busy. You can ask my team. I don't know. Like, I don't know. There's some kind of like internal drive that I don't know that feels urgent. But yeah, there's so much that I want to do, or that I think is possible, that I think I'm one of those. Yeah, I like to say yes, and let's see how we can make this happen. I also really like working with other people. A lot of my projects have been co-curated, and I really, really enjoy doing that. So I was working with Nancy Ireson for the Elijah Pierce show, or even going back to the Afrofuturism show at the Studio Museum in Harlem that Naima and I co-curated, and we still talk about like doing another one. So it's kind of, I think there's something, yeah, I think there's something about an urgency of not just having something to say, but like wanting to share the opportunities or the spaces that I've been, fortunate enough to work in and have worked hard within. I feel like there's an urgency to do that, like to do more. And so I don't know. I think conversely, I was speaking to Alexandria Smith, who's the head of painting at the Royal College of Art, like a very talented artist and an inspiring Black woman. And yeah, I was saying to her that actually I want to try and do less better. So I don't know. There's an urgency to try and slow down that I haven't achieved yet. So yeah, I kind of failing at doing less. But I think that that feels like something that's particularly urgent, that if the whole world is on this kind of forced slowdown, that it's important to look at that kind of the pace of putting things out there, or of productivity, and actually saying there are other ways to do meaningful work kind of slowly and carefully, and maybe Yeah, in a different way, not necessarily deeply rather than like in a huge amount. So I don't know, that feels like a good urgency. I don't know, that's kind of like a weird, like, reverse answer of the question, but I don't know. That's something I've been thinking about.
I like the idea of sort of like a reverse urgency, like the fact that the urgency is actually to slow down, right? That we need to be propelled to do that as well, not just accelerate. So I wonder if there's any questions from in the audience. You can write into the Q&A box, and I think we have just a moment to sort of attend to maybe one question or two questions. I'm not surprised that you're saying that you tend to always keep yourself busy. That's something that seems to make sense in the context within which you're working. You
Yeah.
know, and somehow I think also there's a way in which urgency accompanies just the daily work, right? So without even sort of getting into whatever this specific moment is carrying, there's a certain urgency to sort of making sure that we follow through with all of those leads.
Yeah, and I think, the team and I at Chisenhale have been talking a lot about this, like, at its best, also, like, the work is fun. I mean, it doesn't mean it's not hard work, it's really hard work. There's a lot of hard graft behind the scenes. But it's rewarding, so I think there's something about that that then makes you want to do more. But I think that, yeah, there's the earth, everything is telling us that, there's a real imperative to, not travel as much. If we can do something like this and, save many, many air miles, then that's no bad thing, that we can take time out.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, as there's no questions at the moment, and we only have a couple minutes left, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about this new role that you are taking on, and sort of what it means to sort of be engaged in a truly public-facing engagement, right, with the city, and sort of what you feel like you will be diving into, because I think that that's also that's quite a big and complex role that is connected to really thinking about the weight of history, but also thinking about the potential for the intervention of something new in those spaces, and the kinds of dialogues that are necessary across time.
I think it has a lot to do too with a lot of what we discussed just now. I think that when we think about public space, since it's about the nature of the public realm, like, what does that mean for a range of experiences to feel comfortable and ownership of that space? So what does that mean from an access point of view? If there's a beautiful public garden, but it's up a very steep set of stairs, and you may have mobility impairment, or I think there's so many different ways to think about that I think is really important. And so what I hope, and there's some really amazing thinking partners along this journey too, is to really be thinking about the range of experiences and who gets to access public space, and what the experience is within that. And I mean, taking it back to something like Soul of a Nation, having been so clear in terms of who a primary audience was going to be, knowing that there are audiences plural. One of those ways was to be aware that, the usual places in which, the museum posters were being shown isn't the same public transport system that other people are accessing if they're on the bus or on foot, and they're not using the tube because it costs too much. And so it was the first time that, for instance, posters had actually reached my neighborhood. And so there were these different ways of thinking about that. And so I think just thinking about public space in a manner that we hope is really egalitarian beyond any of our own abilities, or our own subjective position. You know, the fact that I can walk up that steep staircase doesn't mean that everyone can. And so I think that there are a number of ways that we can think about how we honor history's plural and, you know, the experience of Londoners, because we are like, yeah, a really an astonishing, yeah, and great group of people.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And actually, we have one question that popped in that actually really touches on this, because talking about the limit of knowledge within the institutional context and the delivery of the message to the audience, right? So what strategies you use. And I think that what you're talking about here of identifying where we can have access to the audience, what those avenues are, I think speaks really directly to that. I don't know if you want to say a couple closing words on that, and then we can actually just shut down.
Yeah, I'll share a screen on that, because I can give one practical example, because you're right. You can't tell everyone like, oh, I don't know this, or, hey, do you know that I all know that? You know, I think it's easy to say that and it's hard to put it into practice, but to give like a big example, precisely where we started with Justin's question about a group exhibition and a canon. And normally with an exhibition, you're basically like an expert wallpaperer. You know, you're really trying to make sure that you can't see any of those seams. And so that by the time you think you've got this perfect, you're like, oh, wow, I saw everything. I understand it all. And you're not, you know, what gaps are there, or that loan you couldn't secure because, you know, it cost too much to get it there, or because it was already promised to another exhibition, or whatever it might be, or it's in a collection that doesn't lend and it only lives in one place, any number of parameters. You find ways to paper that over and to make sure that those seams are seamless, invisible. I'm just going to share my screen to give an example. Can you see a kind of square painting with a Tondo painting in it of two skeletons wearing police uniforms? And then next to it is Malcolm X being carried out on a gurney. We wanted to show this painting called The Death Makers by Philip Lindsay Mason. I, after much research, was able to be in touch with Dr. Mason, which was incredibly exciting, and we had a short correspondence. But Dr. Mason had no idea what had happened to the painting. This is part of the story we tell in terms of how history is collected or retained, or, you know, who even has access to storage space to safely store, you know, paintings that cost money, it takes up space. And we weren't able to find this painting. I'll come out of share screen now. So one of the ways we did that in the, oh, sorry, I've didn't mean to do that. I'm trying to get back to Zoom. Oh, stop share. There we go. Sorry about that. It wasn't very seamless at all. We actually included a small table display of the many different exhibitions that Philip Lindsay Mason was in at the time. And the fact that despite that, this painting its location was unknown. And don't think we didn't try. We really, really tried. We asked everybody. And so we admitted that by having on the wall a blank space where that painting would be. And on the label, there was a small sticker so that you knew what we would have shown if we could have. And then, of course, in the catalog, which is, you know, a completely different thing from the physical experience, we were then able to talk about that painting in more depth, along with the fact that, you know, Philip Lindsay Mason had a very successful solo show at the Studio Museum in Harlem, etc. And so that was one way of saying, actually, this story does have holes if you hold it up to the light, and we're not going to paper over those. We'll make an effort to say, this is what we wanted to show you, but actually part of the story is this isn't here for you to see. And actually the inequalities that existed within a system of arts patronage and archiving is part of this story as well. So that's one example. But I think it's that kind of thing, that sometimes the messiness of the project, like the outcome that you wanted that you couldn't get to, it's worth sharing that in some way.
Thank you so much for this generous insight to sort of the behind the scenes throughout this, and for your time tonight in sharing with us your journey and a lot of the work. And I hope we'll have an opportunity to sort of catch up in person somewhere down the line. I want to thank you to the whole audience also for sitting in on this conversation, and invite you to look into the other conversations that will be taking place at NYU Florence. And then also in the broader program, I would announce that today, finally, after a really long wait, we do have an English program online. I apologize for the delay. It's just part of the course this year. So thank you again, Zoe, for joining us. And thank you everyone at NYU's team for working behind the scenes and really making it seamless leading into this. And, have a great evening to all of you.
Oh, thank you very much. Bye.